Welcome back to the You're Not Crazy podcast, where we bring survivor stories into light, explore different forms of abuse, and examine the intersections of faith, trauma, and healing. I'm Kendra, your host. For episode 4, Cass wasn't able to join us for the live recording, so it's just Leigh and me today. In this episode, we'll conclude Leigh's story as she navigates the end of her marriage to Jack. Leigh will share both the validation and support she received from trusted voices, as well as the opposition and smear campaign she faced, experiences that are sadly common for survivors as they begin to separate from their abusers. The journey out of an abusive relationship is rarely a straight path. It's an emotional roller coaster, filled with tough choices, but also moments of clarity and hope for what lies ahead. Before we begin, a quick note. Most of our guests use different names to protect their privacy, and each story shared reflects the personal experiences of the speaker and not necessarily the views of myself, Cass, or the podcast. Content warnings for this episode include mentions of spiritual and emotional abuse, stalking, financial abuse, and intimidation, so please listen with care. In episode 3, we left off with Jack issuing an ultimatum to Leigh. Choose him or the children. We'll pick up the story here as Leigh struggles to salvage the relationship and offers a separation to see if their marriage can be repaired. Let's begin there. So you asked him for separation and he refused?
Correct.
Okay.
So I asked him for separation and counseling, and he refused the separation. We went to 3 different counselors. Every counselor we went to, he didn't like what they had to say. But all along, I kept trying to give him out. Like, would you separate so that we can heal? Can you get a job and we get an apartment or something, and we'll even share it so that I'll go there for a week and you can be with the children, and then you go there, trying just so hard to
have workable scenarios.
Yes. And at the same time thinking, I don't trust you with my children. So even as I'm throwing that out there, I'm nervous about it because he wasn't somebody that I felt good about being around the kids, because he was losing it all the time.
Especially without you there.
Without me managing and buffering. So he refused for all of it. But when we get to this part of our story, any relationship I had with a man, whether it was a friends we had been friends with together forever, if it was a father of a client, as a therapist, I see children. So if there was a father that brought his child because she was grieving the loss of her mother, if there was a colleague, another professor, my boss, anybody, there was so much paranoia and belief that I was sleeping around, having an affair, getting ready to leave him. He would wake me up at 2 a.m. Where are you going? Who are you talking to? Just craziness, really bizarre behavior. And then he would take that information, like phone records, like any evidence of, I see you still have this client. He said, isn't that the child that I told you not to see? It was paranoia big time, and I was so rattled.
Strange things began happening in Leigh's life, subtle but unsettling, as Jack's behavior became increasingly manipulative. One morning, as she prepared to give a keynote address, a moment already filled with anxiety, an ironing board fell at her when she opened her bedroom door. It had been carefully propped up to do just that. Jack denied setting it up, but Leigh couldn't shake the feeling it was intentional, a way to rattle her before an important event. Later, when Leigh started dancing again, something that brought her joy and confidence, Jack tried to undermine her. He warned her about the dangers of driving downtown, or criticized her ability to handle traffic, filling her head with fear. One day, he helped by doing the laundry, ruining all her dance gear by shrinking it. I was just trying to help, he claimed, leaving Leigh questioning herself again. This behavior wasn't just manipulative, it was a calculated effort to destabilize Leigh emotionally and mentally, leaving her feeling powerless and questioning her reality. The subtle erosion of her confidence and independence wasn't accidental. It was part of a broader dynamic of control. When you're in a situation where someone is constantly holding on to a rigid narrative about you, refusing to acknowledge any other perspective, it's easy to start doubting yourself, If their version of events never changes, and you're the only other constant in the dynamic, it's normal to begin thinking, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem. You might not fully understand what's happening, and you start thinking, maybe it's something I need to do differently, or maybe it's something I need to not do, or I need to be more patient, or I need to be less sensitive or more understanding. But this thought process is exactly what perpetuates the dynamic and often leads to escalation. It's a manipulative cycle that is incredibly common, especially for empathetic and caring individuals. When someone is so adamant that the problem isn't them, we're often willing to internalize the blame, even when it doesn't fully add up. It's confusing because their certainty makes us doubt our own reality. There's a term for this type of manipulation. It's called crazy-making behavior, and it's a subtle and malicious form of emotional manipulation designed to confuse and destabilize the victim. It erodes confidence, creates self-doubt, and can leave someone feeling isolated and questioning everything. Here are some common signs of crazy-making behavior. Number 1, convincing you something happened when it didn't, or vice versa. A manipulator might deny actions you're certain occurred, or insist something happened when it didn't, causing you to question your memory and perceptions. Number 2, passive-aggressive behavior. This can include subtle actions like pretending not to hear a request, or moving personal items without acknowledgement, or using indirect means to frustrate or unsettle you. Number 3, shifting blame and projecting. Crazy makers often twist events to ensure that the blame always lands on you. Regardless of the situation, they may accuse you of the very behavior they themselves are exhibiting, deflecting attention and avoiding accountability. Number 4, dismissive nonverbal communication. Crazy makers will often make you feel as if you're doing something wrong without uttering a word. Their body language, eye rolls, sighs, or disengagement can make you feel as though you're always doing something wrong. Number 5, making you doubt your perceptions and subtle brainwashing. They will tell you that you've misunderstood them, making it your fault for not interpreting their words or actions correctly. Over time, you may begin to question your way of doing things, feeling that you're always lacking or inadequate. Number 6, hypocrisy. Crazy makers often hold themselves to a completely different standard. They are quick to point out others' flaws, while excusing their own behavior, creating an unfair dynamic. And number 7, setting you up to fail. As the dynamics shift, you will try harder to please them. This constant state of failure further destabilizes your confidence and autonomy. Let's see how this behavior continued to show up in Leigh's life and in this part of her story.
Any conversation I have with him, he would make statements and the next day retract or change everything. So anytime I felt like we gained some ground with how we were going to proceed in trying to be kind to one another and trying to co-parent, trying to just, I remember saying to him, I will always have love for you. We've brought these children into the world. We've adopted children. Like, we've done life together for all this time. Like, I can't continue to merge my life with yours, but I don't want to be arch enemies either. And we would have these kind of conversations that were exhausting and long, and I'd feel like I would get somewhere with him, and then he would burn it down the next day.
Would he act like you never had those conversations?
I never agreed to that, he would say. I never agreed to that. That's not what I said. It's hard to even make sense of. Like, there was a time that I would say, like, our younger son who was in junior high, he really needs your support, and he's in trouble at school, and he's starting to act out. And he's like, I don't know what to say to him. And he didn't. He had nothing to contribute, right? So, and at the same time, he would take 2 of the kids shopping and leave 1 behind, and then come home and call that child to the door. I want you to see what I got the other 2, but not you. And that's your mom's fault because she didn't answer her phone when I called. Just crazy stuff. Like, who does that?
Yeah.
And then I took him outside, I recall, and saying, if you can't treat the children all the same, can't be with them. Like, you can't be abusive to one of them, emotionally abusive to one of them. You've got to treat them all the same. So then he would say, well, I'm not going to see you this week because your mom said I can't see you. You know, everything was my fault. So the kids were like, what? Where, you know, or so then he would be MIA, and I'd try to say, please come take the children, you know, and I don't know what to do with them. Take them to church, take them to go see your mom and dad. Like, it's not that hard to spend a day with your kids. But so it was all over the place. And that's what I mean, where we would make some agreement of what was going to happen. And then the next day, it was just like a house of cards. It would all come tumbling down. And it was so exhausting. At that point, Jack was doing bizarre things, like showing up. You know, my son had his friends have a sleepover to watch the meteor shower at the park. And he showed up in the middle of that, standing on park equipment, yelling for him. Like, weird things, like waking up in the middle of the night, disappearing. I don't know where he was going, if he had a bookie or what was going on, but there was some paranoia about the police following him home and things that just I didn't have enough information to make sense of or excuse away.
Yeah.
He had the police come to our home one time and have flashlights shining in all of our windows saying that I was in danger. Like, there was some very bizarre behavior. And then he started changing churches a lot and bringing people into the home to beg me to do like an intensive intervention. But he kept getting new, fresh audience, right? Every church that didn't know us. I looked like the one that, whatever story he was painting. Like, because by then I felt like I am trying so hard to climb this hill. I went to see some attorneys to say, like, I think we're in financial problem. You know, I'm hearing that we owe money left and right to different people that I was unaware of. He's not stable in his income. I've got 5 kids. What is going to happen if we don't pay people back? And I was told, because you are married, you're putting yourself out there. There's liability for you and whatever he's borrowing.
While Leigh sought legal counsel to address the mountain of debt Jack had created, she also found herself grappling with an even more pressing question: what to do about her marriage and her future with Jack. She had reached her breaking point, feeling trapped and exhausted, but still desperately wanting to do what she believed would honor God. Leigh knew she needed guidance to figure out her next step. A trusted friend referred her to Dr. Warren Lamb, a pastor and counselor with expertise in what he calls domestic oppression. With his extensive training and deep understanding of abuse from a biblical Christian perspective, Leigh felt he could be someone she could trust to help her navigate the turmoil she was facing. Their conversation would become a pivotal moment in her journey, shedding light on dynamics she had been enduring and offering her a path towards clarity and healing. Spoiler alert, Dr. Warren Lamb will be our guest in episode 6. So be sure to subscribe and look out for this upcoming conversation. Now let's hear how Leigh's meeting with Dr. Lamb unfolded.
His name's Pastor Lamb. He's amazing, and he has a whole ministry about this. I didn't know that term before I got to him, and I was really afraid to tell him what was going on. Again, the church that I had been to me, was very clear about domestic abuse looks like this. It looks like someone's hitting you. Mm-hmm. And if you're having problems in your marriage, it's on you to fix that and give up everything and put your marriage first, which I had already done. Yeah. I had sold everything, really believing like I'm going to let go of things that are precious to me, like our family piano, our furniture, our, downsize generously, because God will restore. So I was nervous about what this pastor was going to say, and right away he was like, I'm going to stop you right there. This is domestic oppression. He has already broken covenant. It's already dead, and you are dragging a body around. What you're trying to keep alive is not viable, honestly.
What was he saying to where he thought that Jack had broken his covenant?
Well, this was also after he met with me a couple times and he had met Jack. Okay. So Jack stormed out of there, right? And he said, like, I do work with some men who are willing to change, but it's like 1 in 26 men that will do the work. So what he was seeing, is somebody who was not respecting his wife in a way that he was financially abusing her, stealing from her, posturing in a home where he was threatening and scaring me, and at the door. What I mean by posturing is when someone's angry and blocking your exit, and through a threatening pose, the way they're standing, and so they don't have to hit you, yelling at you 2 inches from your face when you're 8 months pregnant. So this Pastor Lamb was privy to that information and also had met with him and had no qualms about me getting away from this person. And in fact said, he's escalating and I don't want to see you on the evening news. And you can't build stability with something that is unstable.
Right.
But he was ready to give me a safe house with the ministry that he worked with and to assist us because he was scared.
That's not very common for pastors and leaders to understand.
Mm-hmm. I was so grateful and still am that we had left the area that we had lived in for so long to go to a more, I don't want to say progressive, but there was a fresh way of thinking.
Say that.
Yeah, it feels more, the whole city was more progressive in general. But to come across this man and his wife too was just a huge blessing. And I wonder how far I would have gone, because I did 18 years in this environment before I left. So 23 years total of a marriage, but the bulk of our time was in this community. That the messages I continued to get were love keeps no record of wrongs, try harder, look inside, look at you. And I don't think I would have gotten the resolve, or gotten to that place without him. And then because I had a Jewish background, I wanted to be certain. God also put a friend in my life who introduced me to a Rebbe, who is a rabbi to rabbis, who I sat with.
So big time.
He's big time. I've never even met one before, people, this is how big time he was and how clueless I was because I was raised Reform. When I met with him and he knew my story and I shared a little more with him and he blessed me to go, I was so grateful and I was crying that I hugged him. And to the shock and awe of everyone in the room, because no one touches the Rebbe.
That's one of the rules, right?
Yeah. Well, I didn't know. I was so grateful to this kind leader, religious leader. And he was so gracious to me that he didn't correct me. And so one of the women in there was like, we don't touch the Rebbe. And she said, I'm shocked that he did not reprimand. He didn't say anything to you. So you must have really, touched his heart with your story. And so, yeah, he was very gracious to me. But I wanted to be sure. I still wanted to please God in this relationship. It's I needed a pastor, a therapist, and a Rebbe, covered to say you're free to go. Mm-hmm. And once I got that kind of green light, and I wish that I could have been a strong enough woman to trust myself more. I wasn't at that time. I am now, that I don't look for all that external validation, but I needed that then, and I was grateful to receive it. Then I was ready.
While Leigh felt a deep sense of relief and validation from trusted spiritual leaders who understood her situation, there were also other voices that took Jack's side of the story. These individuals felt it was their duty, or even their right, to step in and set the story straight. This is a tragically common experience for women trying to separate from an abusive partner. Often people with only fragments of the story rush in to defend the abuser or criticize the survivor, while others choose to remain silent. Both responses add immense pain and pressure to a journey already fraught with difficulty. For survivors, this lack of support or outright opposition can feel like yet again another betrayal, compounding the isolation and confusion they're already facing. While I was grateful Leigh had found spiritual leaders who could accurately and compassionately speak into her situation, I wanted to know if she had also encountered the other side, the people who doubted or dismissed her. When I asked her about it, here's what she had to say. So did you have experiences where people weren't understanding or they were pushing against you, or do you have any of those situations that happen?
I do a little bit in that, well, yeah, I do actually. Yeah.
Maybe a lot.
Sorry. I'm like, I've blocked that out. Oh, yes. So Jack remember he was a youth pastor, so he had gone to a Bible college, and so he has friends who are pastors, right? Mm-hmm. So he reached out to those friends who then felt entitled to, one of them in particular, was a pastor in Canada, who never asked me or contacted me, but felt the right to contact my children. And also contact my friend from college and his wife, who was a very strong woman too, and told him to F off, to be honest, because he was trying to tell on me or to push that narrative that Jack had promoted and to get everyone up in arms that, I must be having an affair or whatever. But to contact my son, I can't even tell you how upset I was about that, because he was a teenager who was still really confused and trying, and he came with that whole narrative of honor your father.
What was he trying to do through talking with those people?
I think he was trying to put the blame back on me and trying to get everyone to encourage me to stay. That was a bottom line.
Okay.
Encouraged me to stay. And then he had another friend who I think I'd shared in the beginning how we met. It was the brother of an athlete who I grew up with. So that person also, took his narrative as the gospel. And there was a lot of comments coming at me to shame me or pressure me to stay. That I was the one breaking up the family, that I was the one ruining my children's lives, that I was the one that was going to cause them to not have a father, that I was going to re-injure my children who had been orphans to again not have a father. And it was a lot. And I was really angry at these people for using God's name and all of this, but not sitting down with me to hear my story or to believe anything that I was saying, because
did they even ask you, what's your experience or how are you doing? Or
not at all. They got it all from him. And even when I did have any contact with the one friend who was the brother to stay, you're not understanding. There's more to the story. I'm happy to sit down with you and share if you would be willing to hear. He didn't want to betray Jack's friendship to do that. So he was loyal to the end over here. And some of those people were the first Christian men that I knew when I first became a believer. When we first got married, they were in our wedding. They spoke at our wedding. So I had looked up to them, right, as a newer believer. Mm-hmm. And now they were very clearly making me just feel like a Jezebel. I think that word was thrown out there. Just awful things with no knowledge of what was really going on and no openness to hear another perspective.
Wow.
And then the new church friends that he made when he stopped going to the one church, came to the home to try to convince me to do these intensives. And very clearly, Pastor Lamb was like, no, I've heard about these places and it's really abusive, in your situation. This particular one.
Yeah, if you go into a marriage therapy environment or any of that kind of space with someone who isn't properly trained or educated in abuse or domestic oppression, it can be a terrible, terrible situation.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm so glad that you avoided that. You mentioned that Jack was writing letters to people back home. Did you hear from any of them? Were they just quiet?
No, yeah, and that was another thing I heard from one of the pastors that I really respect and love. He got a letter. One of the parishioners that I was still friends with said he asked everyone to pray because there was a family, and she was like, he said enough without using your names that everyone knew who that he was talking about. And she spoke with him about it afterwards, because I was confiding in her at that time, as just a friend and a prayer partner. And she told him, like, don't believe everything. This is not a true story. Yeah, she told the pastor that. Okay. But I never heard from the pastor himself. And then I got wind later, talking to an old boss, that he had received a letter. Because when I started hearing about it, I reached out to him to say, this is what's going on with my family, and you may receive something if you want to talk to me. He's like, I already received it like a month ago, and I threw it away. But so there was some of that, like, I didn't believe it, I got rid of it, but no one reaching out to say, silence. Are you okay? Yeah. Like, oh my gosh. And, my friend that saw the copy that was given to the first pastor, she said it was written in such a haphazard way that you could tell the person writing it wasn't well. Like, it was manic in tone. And I don't know if people just got it and didn't believe it and just didn't want to get involved, but the silence was deafening. It was really hurtful to me. I was already feeling so isolated. I would think at least they would say, we just heard some awful things, like, how are you? Or if they believed it was true, to say, like, what's going on with you? How can we help you come to your senses? Even if they had believed it. I don't know how to make sense of that to this day. Like, why no one said, how are you?
Yeah. And I do want to comment here that the silence can be just as painful as the loud voices.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the things that I see, the reason why there's silence, and so this is like, it's not something I don't blame this part on people, but I think when you're having narcissistic abuse, which is what we're talking about, outwardly it looks like something so different than what it really is. It's hard to know what's really happening here. And when there's confusion and a lack of understanding, people do tend to just hands off.
Yeah.
However, I think we're in the year of 2024 now.
Right.
There's no longer an excuse to be ignorant, to not learn about abuse, because it's so prevalent. It's so prevalent in the church, so prevalent in Christian marriages. So it's like, I empathize, but at the same time, I'm like, we have to do better and know about these things so we can create safe, supportive environments.
Yeah.
But the silence is really hard.
Yeah, it was really sad. And then I had a small community of Messianic believers, right? Because I grew up Jewish, and he never went with me to those functions. Very rarely ever. I took all the kids, but
Jack never went.
He never really went. But when everything started to fall apart, he was the first one there with the story. So that really hurt too, because they sided with him.
Then you don't have any more safe spaces.
And it's super confusing for the children, because now the children are seeing people that they knew were friends of mine that were like family siding with dad. And it doesn't make sense to them. They were so angry, my little kids. So I had to leave. I left that area and came back, not all the way home, but as close to home, because I thought he would follow us. So I went to where I grew up.
So you moved back?
I moved back, and I didn't want to leave my older kids. But at that point, Pastor Lamb was very clear, like, people who have nothing to lose and who are desperate can do desperate things. And he's getting kind of scary. One of my sister-in-laws, two of them contacted me and kind of did an intervention, and they said, we're going to help you get out of here, and we'll pack you. Don't come back, because we're worried about you. We love you, and we'll pack the house, and you guys just stay gone. But they had found a concealed to carry permit. He had never owned or had any interest in guns before, and it scared them. And it scared me, to be honest. And behavior was getting more and more bizarre. I couldn't seem to reach him. And so I had to leave my pets and my two older kids and trust my sister-in-laws to pack me and leave with what I could pack and try to start over.
Again.
I had 3 very angry very hurting younger children and 2 just really hurting, confused older children. One off in college, but just like, what happened when I left, kind of like, because I had really tried to buffer a lot and things fell apart in a big way the year she left. All of us have had healing journeys, and I so regret how much injury was done to my children over time as I was trying to hold things together. I should have cut loose long before, but in the name of trying to hold your family together and honor God, they lived years of an illusion and now have to sort it out.
Yeah, we tell ourselves we're staying for our kids because there's this thing drilled into our heads that we need a mom and we need a dad and they need to be forever together. And obviously that's the goal.
Yeah.
But it's like there's a point where maintaining that, standard is actually more harmful than good.
Yep.
And I think that it's so great that you're telling your story because I know that it's hard and I know you have regrets, and I just want to say you did the best with what you knew. But I think it's so important for our listeners to hear, there's other options that are actually healthier and better.
Yeah. And
that we can choose when we have, a partner that is abusive, that is not doing the work, that has mental health. So how would you, knowing what you know now, what do you think was and is going on with him from that perspective, a mental health perspective?
It's really hard because as a therapist, I could probably see it more clearly if it wasn't in my range of, family.
Yeah.
It's hard to be objective when you're on the receiving end of a lot of it. I clearly think that there's a narcissistic personality issue, and that's on the spectrum, right? And I think when Jack gets stressed by his inability to do things, those behaviors escalate because he loses control. So I think that when I look at children, I'm a children's therapist, I think unresolved trauma on top of maybe some processing differences. So if someone's on the spectrum, it's not addressed, and kids learn to compensate.
Yeah.
And I think very clearly, there was always something that Jack had to compensate, and then he wasn't understood in his home. He was the only boy. I think his father had a line of alcoholism handed down to him, and so there was some anger and outbursts and misbehavior on Jack's part that then was met with a lot of anger and shame, and it just creates over time a person who, I call it the chocolate rabbit, the hollow bunny, that you see it looks like one thing on the outside to survive, but on the inside it's hollow. There's not a sense of self. So they're borrowing a sense of self from others and latching on to someone like me with high empathy and ability. I mean, not to toot my own horn, but I'm pretty capable.
Yeah.
And so I think then it became the two of us are one person, but I'm going to be the parasite in the relationship, right? And for me, I've had to really look at my own ego of trying to be the superhero, rescuer, codependent, nurturer that allowed for that at my own expense and at the expense of my children, and really at his expense. Somebody finally, I think it was probably Pastor Lamb, that said, God is here and Jack is here, and you are my friend in between them. And he cannot receive accountability or teaching or love or anything because you keep trying to buffer and get in the middle of this mix. It is not your place. Step out of the way. And that was so refreshing and relieving to hear that, because we're not built for that. That's not what we're called to do, and Christ has that position in the story already. I don't need to be the savior, but it's always felt good to me to be nurturing.
Yeah.
I just kind of came into the world of high nurture. Yeah.
It's celebrated, and it looks like the noble thing to do when you're a Christian in the church, and we'll unpack this in future episodes, but there's a huge difference between normal baggage, normal junk, weaknesses in people's character, and this type of abuse that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's truly like trying to put out a wildfire with like a home fire extinguisher. You can't do it.
You can't do it. And what I know is that things disintegrate over time naturally. So as you try to hold things together as people age, if there's not intervention, I think things get worse. Like people fall apart a little bit worse because they're accumulative, of stress and the way that the brain works in general, like cortisol and adrenaline and all these things erode the ability for the brain to function well. And I see things more clearly, obviously now looking back and, the Monday morning quarterback view, I can see things more clearly, but he definitely eroded over time. Yeah. His mental health eroded over time. It's not going to just get better. It's not just a season. But I've had to do a lot of my own inner work because I've had to let go of trying to understand this and look at my own part and how I want to live going forward.
So Leigh, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that it is incredibly challenging to go back and relive those days and just come in touch with the pain again. I mean, I even felt the pain of your story, hence me breaking down in earlier episodes. And I've felt it many times, as we've met to share. But thank you for your courage. Thank you for your bravery. Thank you for your willingness to create the capacity to share with other survivors and victims out there and people that are in their lives trying to understand and help in these types of situations. So I guess I just want to ask you before we end, what would you say to any survivors or victims out there that are experiencing or have experienced what you've been through?
Gosh, that's really good. It's such an important question, one that carries a lot of weight, right? So I think I sit here and I think, I don't hate Jack. I still have compassion for him. And one thing I would say to people in my situation is that you can hold compassion for people without losing yourself. You have to factor yourself into the equation of who gets to be cared for and who gets to be loved and who gets to be safe. And you also don't have to lose that part of yourself or beat yourself up to think that you love too hard, that you tried too much. Like, it's part of who you are. It's a beautiful quality of who you are, that you carry empathy and you carry love for people. It's just a matter of trying to find that balance of loving in a way that's healthy. The best way I can love now is to just ask God for healing and mercy. I do not reach out to say happy birthday, happy Father's Day, nothing, because I have learned over the course of time post-divorce that any attempt to continue to show compassion to this person entangled me in a toxic nightmare. So I have to know how to love with detachment, but I don't have to lose that part of myself, and I'm not going to lose who I am in this whole thing. I'm going to get stronger, I'm going to get better, I'm going to get healthier, I'm going to have boundaries, but hating or saying horrible things back, it's not true to me. So I think everybody gets to be true to themselves, but try to be the best version of themselves with a whole lot of grace and put the energy back into you, so that you don't replicate these type of relationships going forward, and that you draw a different person to you, because that part's really good.
Hey listeners, Kendra here. Thank you for joining us throughout Season 1 and walking alongside Leigh's journey. I've heard from so many fellow survivors who've shared that this story feels like it could have been their own. I'm grateful that this podcast has helped you feel validated and less alone. In Episode 5, Cass, Leigh, and I will reflect on the lessons learned from her story, diving deeper into the insights and takeaways. Then in Episode 6, our season finale, we'll have an enlightening interview with Dr. Warren Lamb, a pastor who specializes in domestic oppression. As we look ahead to future seasons, you might be wondering if your story could be one to share. Leigh's story focused on narcissistic abuse in a marriage context, where spiritual beliefs influenced her decision to stay and try harder. But abuse takes on many forms. You may have experienced a toxic or abusive relationship with a parent, a friend, a sibling, or even within a church culture or leadership setting. This podcast will explore all these dynamics while addressing the role of spiritual abuse in each one. Whether you're certain your story fits within this category or you're unsure, I'd love to connect with you. Please reach out at you'renotcrazy.co@gmail.com. I'm here to support you on your healing journey. And if you've been enjoying these episodes, I'd greatly appreciate if you could leave a rating and review. It really helps spread the word about this podcast. Thanks for listening.